Our next guest speaker is Harry Barth, Esquire. Harry Barth is the founder and senior managing partner for Barth Calderon LLP, and is a co-author of the book, Planning Today for All Your Tomorrows. He's a nationally recognized speaker on estate, business, and asset protection planning to many incredible organizations across the country. And I'm sure I'm going to write more questions as we hear from Harry. Welcome.
Well, good morning, Bruce. Good morning, everybody. It's great to be here. Hard to believe it's October already. Boy, it seems like we just did this last year. This is one of my favorite Saturday mornings of the year. Maybe I'm a little weird, but I really enjoy it. I love catching up with Amanda, Matt, and Karen, and Dino, and Bruce and Aaron. Is great. But a lot of things are happening this year, and I want to put a bit, maybe perhaps a little bit of a different spin, give us some more specific information, and maybe look into the future a tad. So first of all, this is what I call putting order into chaos. There's chaos about. We've had one tax proposal that was shot in by the Senate Finance Committee in April, 5 changes to the House Ways and Means proposal, and we still have yet to see the text of the legislation that may or may not get enacted before Thanksgiving. And it's broad and it's sweeping. And as Matt and Amanda said, a lot of things that were in are out, but we don't know if they're out. They may be back in again. But I think we need to take a look and be a little bit more introspective about this. I've been doing this for about 50 some odd years. And what we may see is a lot of it out, ladies and gentlemen, in order to get a bill through, which is political. But back in 1986 and 1987, I did some work with the United States Department of Treasury and Undersecretary of State Ron Perlman with Ronald Reagan. And what we did at the end of the day was a separate, standalone Tax Reform Act. If you remember, it was the Tax Reform Act of 1986. So what we see is all of these proposals. It's all on the radar screen. The elimination of step-up in basis, the increase in capital, all can be bundled yet again next year or the year after into a Tax Reform Act. So we need to keep this on our radar. Maybe for the moment we can step back a little bit, but we're still not sure because although this is not meant to be political, there are those all the way on the left, known as the progressives, and they may not vote for the things that we have without the actual impact upon the wealthy that is anticipated. So I think we have a lot to wait and see and do. Now, let me give you an example of that. Matt and Amanda spoke very much about income taxes. Let me just give you a little background on what's going on in the estate tax arena. This is very important because this is when you build all your real estate up. You know, by its very nature, we would like to be able to pass our wealth to the next generation. It seems that in most of this tax legislation, there's a target. It seems that they do not want wealth to concentrate in the hands of a small number of families. It seems that they believe in income inequality. So what we're seeing here at this point is legislation in the estate arena to force that to break down. Under the current tax proposal, we each have $11.7 million of estate tax or transfer tax exemption. And under the proposal that was in April, it went to $3.5 million and 45, 50, 50% above. In the House Ways and Means Committee, it went to $6 million and 40% above. And lately, in the last few days, as Amanda and Matt said, it's kind of quiet as to what that's going to be. Don't let that fool you, because on December 31st, 2025, automatically, ladies and gentlemen, absent any legislation, the estate tax exemption moves from 11.7 to 5, maybe $6 million with inflation. So we don't look just in 2021. We have to look a little further if we're going to be able to make a transition from one generation to the next. The thing that's so insidious about this particular tax bill, and I've been looking at tax bills for a half a century now, is that this was not just a proposed change in tax rates and tax structure. This bill made an all-out assault, and still does, against the tools that people like myself and firms like my own use to help you transition tax from one generation to the next. Interfamily discounts, the use of something which we call grantor trusts, and other tools that we have used for years to help people transition wealth from one generation to the next. Although the rates may be same or not touched in this particular legislation, I am sure buried in there will be the continued tax on the tools. So in effect, everyone winds up paying greater intergenerational tax than they did before. So I think we won't know that till we see the allegedly 1,457 pages of the actual text of what's going to wind up in this bill. Then, as said earlier by all of my colleagues, has to be negotiated with the Senate, then back to the House, and back and forth, and then put over to Uncle Joe for signature, and on the hopes that maybe the infrastructure and the social spending bill can get through. There's a lot of distance that has to happen in between that. But a lot of things have happened to us over the last couple of years. We've all experienced and are still experiencing a pandemic. That pandemic has had impact on real estate market, has had impact on leases. It has had impact on employer-employee relations, and now it has impact on vaccine and vaccine mandates. So what we're seeing here, as you all know, we do a tremendous amount of asset protection work. In addition to all of the liabilities that we all face every single day, we have increased liabilities coming as a result of the pandemic and the emerging from the pandemic. The other thing I think that's very important to understand is when we do tax planning or estate tax planning is we're also beginning to see an emergence of significant inflation that may be with us for a while. And that may kind of turn some things on its head as we look into the future over the next couple of years and how inflation is going to play in. And for those of you that are joining us this morning that own real property in California, I think you'll all remember, if not, I'll remind you of California Proposition 19, which was narrowly elected by the electorate last November. In that legislation, ladies and gentlemen, it basically eliminated all parent and child transactions as far as reassessment for property taxes, where before $2 million worth of in a family of assessed real estate value could pass the children without the assessor's office reassessing the tax to the new highest tax basis, and an unlimited exemption for the family home from one to another has been eliminated. There's a cockamamie $1 million exemption if the children live in the house. But Proposition 19 has been extremely difficult for California taxpayers. Now, as a result of California Proposition 19 and its horror show, and the fact that it was sold to most of the voters, shall we say, without full disclosure, there is I want to make everybody know, there is a bill or a proposition being fashioned now to reach the general election in November of 22 to repeal Proposition 19 and return the $2 million worth of assessed value in the family home. The families, which you think about it, is they were trying to go after, once again, large intrafamily wealth transactions and reassess. But what they actually did is for many, many families, low to moderate income families, all their wealth is in their home. And sometimes they have a family business that's been in the business for generations, and that business owns a building that contains all the machines that they use to manufacture the things that they do. Under Proposition 19, many times, although the family has spent generations in that home, Now that home could be lost because one cannot afford to pay the property taxes, and or that business could be lost because they can no longer afford to pay the property taxes after 50 years of a readjustment of that business that was in a family. I think that that is horrible. Now, what do I see and what should be done? I think, and I was thinking about this, I said that Karen and Amanda, Matt, and Dino, they're all going to give you very specific information, which they've done and done very, very effectively. But what do I think on top of that or in conjunction with that is the most important thing that we can have as a takeaway at this time? Inflation, pandemic, tax change, spending change, and attitudinal change from people and division in our country and political change. I think it's time for everybody to take a step back and engage in strategic, legal, and financial planning. I think it's very, very important to look at our insurance and make sure our insurance is adequate. Make sure that our entities are structured properly. Dino brought that up as far as a 1031 exchange. We see that all the time. An operating agreement is not just a piece of paper. An operating agreement can be fashioned carefully to provide better asset protection and better walls for each and every one of us. I think it's very important to plan for taxes now, taxes in the future. I think it's very, very important when we think about transitioning wealth from one generation to the next. How do we do it? How do we do it in such a way that we can maintain our own financial independence? I've seen so many where our firm is helping so many people transition so much property from generation one to generation two that now we have to look back, and does it leave them vulnerable for their own financial independence as we move forward? How many estates are beginning to run through probate? How many estates are beginning to think about what is it that we really want for the quality and the practicable utilization for our children? This emerges into what we're also seeing a large trend in the charitable sector. In other words, can we donate our property to a private foundation? Can a private foundation help us avoid transfer taxes? What about the use of a charitable remainder unit trust to sell a highly appreciated property so we don't have to pay any current capital gains tax and on the state or federal level, and basically spread that out over our lifetime? How do we make up for that to our children? All of these questions and are literally have to be fashioned into a blueprint, into a strategy. I think that that is more important than anything else. Ad hoc taking a piece here, a piece here, a piece there is not great. We wouldn't build a house that way. When you go to build a house, right, we don't just like putting hammers and nails. We have an idea of what that house should look like. We engage an architect. We have blueprints. We make modifications. We make changes before we start construction. What I'm saying to you that we are in the midst of a tremendous paradigm shift politically, socially, tax-wise, and many, many other areas. And I can't rest comfortably, one, until I have much more specifics, as was talked about earlier by my colleagues, of what will ultimately come out. We think it's better, but then let's put it this better. It's better than the draconian legislation that they introduced, but we're not sure of what's going to come out. And what I'm adding to that is I'm not sure that whether next year or the year after, depending upon political fortune, we won't have a standalone tax reform act. So I think it's very important that we engage in the strategy and put it together. So what's the takeaway from me today? And of course, I'll be answering specific questions during our question and answer session. And as always, you'll see in the chat that every time I speak on this particular Saturday, my firm and myself, we offer a complimentary consultation for every one of you that are with us this morning to follow up on all the things that we're going to talk about today. So it's not a question of specifics. It's a question of strategy and tactics. And you know what? Look at the title of today's event. It's strategies and tactics. strategies and tactics. What are the goals and the objectives for the family? What are the goals and objectives in the estate plan? What are the goals and objectives of the tax plan? Sometimes, and I'm sure Amanda and Matt have seen this, and Karin, and the tail begins to wag the dog. We're so worried about the tax that we might create vulnerability for ourselves. It might not be the best economic deal in the world. There are so many things that we need to do and we need to look at. Now, one thing I want to just add as a specific that everybody should know, especially for those of us in California dealing with Proposition 19, although there has been an elimination of the parent-child exclusion for the $2 million of assessed value and for all intents and purposes on the family home with regards to the increase in property taxes, which could be significant. I'm talking 4, 5, 6, 7 times from what it was originally numbers of years ago. There are methodologies that we can utilize because the legislation, believe it or not, did not impact the way that we can use in a series of steps LLCs to actually move property from one generation to the next. We've given it enough time and given it a proper strategic approach without an increase in property taxes. So there still are some ways to do it. A little bit more complicated, require a few more steps, a little bit more costly, but it still can be done. So what I want to do, I'll answer specific questions during the Q&A session. I wanted to bring everybody to the point of to understand that none of us really know what the future is going to hold in the near future. But we're going to do our best to help get the planning there. Estate changes could be significant. I really think that they're talking a lot about income tax changes, and I think we may see some estate tax moves go along the way. And with that, that's pretty much what I have. And I want to now turn everything back over to Bruce and Aaron